My name is Michael Rhodes and I'm from Australia, and I'm here to talk about Through the Eyes of book is, in my metaphysical travels I do visit the fifth dimensional reality, and that's in the book. I do talk about life and explore life on many levels. I visit the Buddha, but this time the Buddha's not exactly what I expected. There were a lot of surprise in it for me, a lot of surprises. And now, for instance, for me, I'm halfway through book 4. So every book is like an ongoing journey that I take, and stalking the Taurus, for instance, T-O-R-U-S, the learning that in every thing of life there is a Taurus, which is a field of energy, which is an incredible movement, like a double donut, turning inside out and around itself. It's I can't describe it. I don't believe anybody can, and yet it's in every cell of our body. It's in our body as a whole. The earth has it, and when a human being is in balance, that Taurus is absolutely one of the most beautiful things you could ever gaze upon metaphysically. When they are hurting, probably the way that 85% of the population is hurting, it's a very distorted Taurus. And so the book explores, for instance, that sort of thing, and the trial of looking at this time of change, looking at probabilities. If you haven't read it, it's like I said, it's the best book you've never read.
But what's the basic message? You're not saying your message.
The basic message of all my books is love.
Okay.
That's the basic message of every one of my books. This is what I teach. You know, I found and experienced unconditional love. And when you experience it, you realize that there are no questions left. There are no human problems. Everything comes down to a lack of loving self. And there's nothing outside of self. Okay, we're not talking physical body, obviously. But when you realize there's nothing outside of self and you're loving self, then you're putting into the human consciousness, you're putting love. And it's the greatest contribution today anybody can make. So for instance, me, in my books and in my life, I travel the world and I'm spreading a virus, a particularly potent one called a love bug. And I'm hoping that a lot of people will catch it, and that this may be, if you watch this, it just may infect you. And so my message to the world traveling is choose love. No matter what situation you're in, consciously choose love. Because that's not part of the program. That's not part of the insanity. And that's the direction humanity's heading. And it's not part of any of that. To consciously choose love places you in a position where you can make other choices that honour you, rather than being caught up in the treadmill of reaction and fear and anger, etc., which is so common today. So in all my books, and there's another 2 coming out, in all my books I'm exploring life on a multi-dimensional level, in a non-physical level, life as pure energy, but always it comes down in the end. It's always about love in the end. That's the bottom line. When you're loving yourself, you really don't have problems. And when you're not loving yourself, which is very common. Now when we're talking love, we're not talking of an emotion. Love is the power of creation. And when that we have 3 levels of emotion: lower, middle and high. The high level of emotion we call love. It's not really love at all, but we can call it human love. And then way above that, in a higher level of consciousness, there is unconditional love, or absolute love, or divine love. That's the place to be. And that, you have a completely different experience of life. Your whole relationship changes. So if we were going to wrap this up, and we're probably not, but I would say your relationship with yourself is your relationship with life. And it doesn't matter if you know nothing. You don't need esoteric knowledge. You need a relationship with yourself where you love yourself, where you appreciate yourself, you respect yourself. You have an immense gratitude that you are who you are. When you have that going for you, you walk a different path from most of humanity. It's always down to unconditional love, no conditions. You love somebody, it's not if you're nice to me, I love you. If you speak to me, I love you. If you treat me well, I love you. Doesn't matter how badly they may treat you, and somebody very close, some family member. Doesn't matter how badly they treat you, you just choose unconditional love. You choose to love them. And what they do is none of your business. How they take it is none of your business. It's what comes from you. And you can only do that when you're loving yourself. When you're loving yourself, as I said, there is nothing outside self. That's a whole long more subject. And you just find that life is absolutely beautiful and everything works perfectly. You know, my way of life is, it is as it is. And that's a simple, not should be this or should be that, it could be this or could be that. It is as it is. Live it, deal with it and love it. No matter how negative it might seem, choose love. You're in the airport, they said, you've just arrived in Japan, and they say, no, you can't enter Japan. And you've only got about 50 people waiting for you who've flown in from other countries in Asia. You can't go into Japan because you've got the wrong visa, which is the same one you've had to go in for the previous 9 years. And so they take you away and put you in a prison hotel, and you're treated pretty badly, and you smile and you say, choose love. And if I forget, she reminds me. There's times like that I'm a little bit tempted to choose tough love. But on with what we do, you encounter something of everything. The dynamic between chaos and order, it's the dynamic of life. When chaos is strongest, as is happening now over the planet, but that doesn't mean that has to happen in every person. The chaos is rising in the planet. The earth is heating up from the centre. It's not coming down from the sun, it's heating up from the centre, warming from the centre. What's happening on this planet is global, but chaos is the engine that drives. Order is the stability of structure, and it's like holding a wet towel and twisting in opposite directions. And there's a point where that towel, the torsion between chaos and order, is absolutely imbalanced. And balance is the place of greatest potential. You can find that in yourself by not denying life, simply taking life as it is and making choices. And when you choose love, you bring that dynamic into a balance. You bring it, and so conflict drops away. But that doesn't mean there is no conflict. It means you've moved beyond conflict. Like in our bodies, dis-ease simply means out of harmony. And when we say we have a heart attack, it simply means we've been attacking the heart. And suddenly it said enough. And so lay down and recover for a little while I try to recover, so it lays the body down, and we don't like that. But there's an enormous sacrifice when we sacrifice life to be safe and secure, and then we stagnate. And basically, as regards on a consciousness level, humanity is stagnating. This does not mean every individual, but as a species, we're stagnated in consciousness, which is not really a good idea. Because we can't do our own growing. Nature looks at us as a species and says they're not doing too well, I'll help them. And you can rest assured we would not like the help. And so it's a good idea to make the choices. A bookshop like this, Watkins, it contains probably thousands of books. And those books are all different in many ways, and yet most of them say the same message and the same story. We have to grow in consciousness. We have to evolve as spiritual beings rather than get caught up in the heavy physicality of ownership, of want, of need, etc., etc., etc. We always want more. And today, around the world, we have poverty. It's growing now. It's in England, it's growing. Europe, in country has a massive debt. It's in Ireland, it's all through Europe. And the voice of poverty is, I want. And we're trained by the media to want. I want, I want. We're taught to want from children now. Whereas the voice of abundance is, I have. And if we were to look at what we have so much. Even if there was nothing but good health, what an incredible have. And yet we're, as I say, we're brainwashed into wanting. And that wanting doesn't work. And so as a spiritual teacher, as I travel the world, what I teach basically is what works. We have humanity lives in most countries in a way that does not work. And so there are hospitals because people get sick, they get ill. We live a half-life, literally, and it doesn't work. And so we've created a society that supports what doesn't work, and it still doesn't work. And we're not doing well with it. And so humanity is probably itself calling for help. And I really don't think we're going to like the help when it comes. It's a really good idea to choose to go ahead and not wait for the help. When the help comes and does the house cleaning, it might be a good idea to be well out of the house and make sure that you don't get splashed with whatever's going to take place in what I would call a cosmic or planetary house cleaning. We're right on the edge of that. Use it. And so I'm writing a series of books, Through the Eyes of Love, Journeying with Pan. And book 3 has come out, which will be followed in quick succession by book 2 and book 1, which are published in other ways. And so, also just to clear up any misunderstanding here, Journeying with Pan. This is not a horned goat running around with hoofs, talking in English or something like that. When we're talking of Pan, you could take the word panorama. And so Pan is literally the spirit of nature. And there's not a being, there's not a person, there's nothing like that at all. There is simply the conscious and intelligent spirit of nature, which is incredibly powerful and is literally in all. And I've had a long sort of relationship which I very reluctantly got dragged into. Now I have no reluctance whatsoever, I enjoy it. And so I travel. One of the things in this book, it talks about a fifth dimensional reality. And we will say, well, okay, how do you get out of the 3? We don't need to go there. The fourth dimensional reality is like all time, all space occupies the same place. And so in a fifth dimensional reality, things are rather different. Nobody works for money. It's very different. Every child by the age of 6 knows everything there is to know about their body. And their way of building houses is very interesting. To take one example, nobody actually owns anything because ownership it's an illusion we play with. And if a person's going to build a house, a couple shall we say, they develop a relationship with the land and they learn whether the land accepts them or not. If this is their place, as it were, whether the energy is compatible energies. Generally they get it right because they're very aware and very conscious. And so when they build this house, they have 3 basic specialists. There's no building takes place. There is a person who has a very deeply based connection with human emotions, human emotional imagination, human emotional intelligence. Another one has a very deep connection with the earth, and another one has a very deep connection with the etheric kingdom. And so they stand on the day that they're going to bring this into being. They stand in a circle, the owners and these people. And linear time is not the same for them. And so they stand in a circle and they attune with the land and they attune with what they're doing. They stay focused. For us, we can't focus for very long. They can stay focused for hours on end, holding a single pinpoint focus. And so when they've done this for, it would seem like hours, this takes basically this process from sunrise to sunset, pretty much you'd say. And then the specialist, I think the first one who does this, from my memory, the first one who does this is the one that connects with the earth. And then that seems to be more hours. And then the second one connects with human emotion, emotional intelligence, which is a very, very powerful energy that we almost don't understand here. And the third level is the etheric. And by sunset, you'll begin to see as though somebody has formed a bubble. And this bubble is shimmering, it's translucent, and the bubble has a relationship with the earth. It's developing like bubble, and yet it will be in a somewhat like a shape that we might expect, except it's all rounded. And it takes about another 3 days, and that hardens. And they program it so it can be translucent, so you can't look into it, but they can look out of it. The house has a type of intelligence. It's sentient and can't move, but it's sentient. And so it develops a relationship with you, and that relationship is it's not in our awareness at all. And so the land, this is interesting, the land, that area, they might have a hectare, they might have an acre, but the land and the house landscape the land. but they don't change anything, and yet everything changes, and it's so incredibly subtle, the difference. It's though the land comes into harmony with the people and with the house. And you get this amazing, amazing house that opens up an opening as you want to go in, and it's something like in our dreams, and yet it's very real. You could run a car into it at full speed, and it seems like as though it's not much more than a bubble, and the car would bounce off. That would be difficult because they don't have cars. They don't have transport the way we do. What they have, many of them wear a belt, and on the belt there seems to be a stud. And so you press the stud, and a glow comes out around them, and then the glow goes down, and you're where you wanted to be, and yet you haven't travelled, you haven't moved. So what it does, it takes away the space between two places. And so instead of travelling a distance, it takes away the distance. Now, you may have a job wrapping your brain around that. I have a huge problem wrapping my brain around that, but I've experienced it, and it happens. And so cities, for them, their cities are spread out enormously because there's absolutely no transport problems. And their cities, in a city, they bring in one more level of building, and that's an astral level. And so you see these amazing buildings, and absolutely astonishing buildings, that literally might be a huge building sitting on something just like that. And you look at it, you think that's impossible. But it isn't impossible. It's interesting, when you're in that reality, they use high tech, but it's not obvious. The higher the consciousness, I found, it's not so much as lower tech. The tech is very high, the technology, but you don't see it. Like for us in a three-dimensional reality, you really see our technology. It's in your face. Everybody's walking along talking to their fists, etc., etc. Whereas there it's very different. They have sort of games a bit like our Olympic Games, but they do not compete. And that's another difficult one to wrap your head around. They have no competition. They cooperate. There's no winners or losers, but there is achievement. And their prowess and physically is so far beyond ours, that's a bit embarrassing. There's no sickness, there's no aging. But it's where we're heading. It's our journey, it's the direction we're going. We are now living 3-4 dimension. The only part that's 3-dimensional is our bodies. Nothing else about us is 3-dimensional. Your thoughts, your imagination, your emotions, all such things are 4-dimensional. And so we're moving those who make that choice from 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional to 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional. And that is an enormous step. Some people could say that's a form of ascension, but that's a fairly big subject which I won't go with. So in a 3-dimensional reality, the energy, that's the most amazing thing. Coming back to a 3-dimensional reality, energetically it's heavy. We've made it heavy. If you go back, as I often step back to the hunter-gatherer periods, because time ceases to exist, you find it equally as an incredibly light energy. The humans there are living in a very different way. They're far more self-aware in many ways. They're 1,000 times more self-reliant. They have a far greater relationship with the world around them than we do. There's nobody to support them, there's no governments, there's no dole, there's nothing like that. And so their self-reliance is way, way beyond ours. And these are supposed to be our ancestors. Mind you, you can find the reality frame where they're still doing it very, very well. And so this planet has developed a very, very heavy energy. It's as though we've reached a time where you have to get your antenna to go above it, otherwise it drags us down. And so it's pretty obvious to aware people that we're going through a time of change, and that change is very considerable. People expected to see things happen at the 2012, 22nd of December, and there was not much to see, but that change was precipitated at that point and is taking place on a very deep and powerful level. Nothing to see physically, but change is taking place. Chaos is rising. When I talk of chaos, I'm talking of the engine that drives. For instance, a wildfire is chaos out of control, whereas when chaos is balanced with order, which is the stability of structure, You bring those two, there's a torsion between them. There's a point where there's perfect balance. And when you find that perfect balance, which is the very dynamic of life, and in that perfect balance, which we can find in every cell of our bodies and in ourself as a whole being, when you find that point, your direction is already made. You're moving into the place of balance and of newness. And if there's a human problem today, it's an attachment to more of the same. The safe and secure. It's what I call a hermit crab life. Safe and secure. Hermit crabs are very safe and secure, but they're limited, they're contained, and they're restricted. They don't really go far. They wander around their little, on the seashore in their little puddles, in their little pools that are left when the tide goes out. And yet we wander around on our little earth.